นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณสัมปันโนสุขโตโลกวิทูอนุตตรปุริสธัมมสารติสัตตเทวมนุสังพุทโธภควติสวากาโตภควตาธัมโมสันติทิโกวากาลิโกเอหิปัสสิโกโอปานายิโกปัจจัตตังเวดิตาภูวิญโยหิติสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆอุจุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆญาญาปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสามิจิปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆยะติตังจัตตาริปุริสยุกานิอัตถปุริสปุกะลังเอสะภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆอาหุเนโยปาหุเนโยดาคิเนโยอัญจลิการณิโยอนุตตรังปุญญาเกตังโลกัสสติภวตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพพุทธานุภาเวนัสสดาโสติภวันตุเตภวตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตา Sabbhadhammanubhave sadhasoti bhavatu sabbhamang rakantu sabbadevata sabbhasanghanu bhavena sadasoti bhavantu te. Sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata, sabbe dukkha pamujantu. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you.
야, 다들이 니만 이버디 양 아주 양자도스 다 소요리 엔다 가서 시스버너시 아니 산제베 최디 대바 롱아도 네그리사치 또 순요리 다 간다 로니도 다 하시 또 심버리 제다 시 주로 몽고 지 야지 야제드라데 야마 구드라로 데데 다 용되게 요리 산제베 최디 패실 tempo shushnere sorchi ta hawar tarikesa ene nuchu yutuna na tanga ene saje ge mese yurusuna lo ne donaru chetia chi yonde ge do sa de ji ge tuzuri ya ngana zu de lo tongzha ge le shenden de ge jianzhang na ma yin de wo ngana zu da 지기 그게 내주 시베타네 에 아주 더 투뭉 에 좀된데게 추즈디 자볼리디가래야 제 안도보도 내버 여디디 그게 무튼이 나야다 양지 벌거 냠버도 되리 지금 냠버 소추트야 지금本来家伙不要送给유주靠蒙古去了벌거 때문에倒是냠묘래当然第一的也是냠버 소르치 민요 공부 용도야 지기 신내 디물람 교대게 에네 처로 넘어져에 대공부장 엔 대민기다 대가사제 외쳐 저 매도도 저기 산제베치 나로리아 심카리베 고드즈 제다 아니 뜨루 고드즈 제디 비시우지기다 야심부터 띵서우신 예외인들산에 야 최대 유명한 마드베 도나징의 용대요리 다 들으지기 뒤즈데 나라서 냐라 좀 된데게 제가 직유인부즈 야 나라 상월로 지 파츠식 저치야디 그저 투도 그다 숙처를 따네 아니 다 남지 쇼다로 제외이나 발리기 주유다 레자기 주유제네 다 도스요리 저사 아니 그런 알아도 도스식 저 융접을 소리지 다 가서 발리기 주유다 아니 레자기 주유 엔디 아주 망스프게다 저런이 지하로 죽나 판도된데 연구를 다들 그 도시된이야 매 타일랜드 그게 또야 지기 디네로 춘주시도 시야래 나대 사가시 심벌이 또 뒤서로 전에 아주 다 시 발리기 추진중에다 레자기 추진중에서 아주 지기 zhag does book, soul rajita, any Hulu Cheche, any trolling did the Chituna, then the Panto Yunguri. And the China, Trita and the Japanese Shagando. Not the
Today we are meeting for the second day, and it's wonderful to meet with you again here. We are all followers of one and the same Buddha, and we spoke about some of the key aspects of the Buddha's teaching yesterday. And generally, there is the understanding in the Buddhist texts that the Buddha's teaching will last for 5,000 years on this earth. And already more than 2,000 years have passed. So of course, historically, if you look across human history, we will see different religious traditions come into being and at some point decline and disappear and so on and so forth. But we are now living through a time where actually, if you look at the history of the Buddhist tradition as a whole seems to be actually quite stable, quite firm. And especially in the historically traditional Buddhist countries, like all of us, we have been followers of the Buddha for over 1,000 years in each of our traditions. So in these traditional Buddhist countries, the Buddhist tradition is very strong. And furthermore, we are now living through a time where there is a growing interest in Buddhism and the Buddha's teaching in the West as well, which historically has not been a place where the Buddha Dharma has flourished. So in this kind day and age, when there is a growing interest in different parts of the world beyond the historically traditional Buddhist countries and societies, it is important, I feel, on the part of us who are followers of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha, and students of the Buddha historically, to be able to really think beyond our own individual specific traditions and think of Buddha Dharma as a whole, and think about how the Buddha Dharma as a whole could continue flourish. And part of that, it is important for the followers of the Buddha, the students of the Buddha, to have closer understanding, closer contact. And of course, it is very desirable, but to be honest, up to this point, the relationship and the contacts could be done more. We could see better contacts, more contacts. And part of that contact has to involve deeper appreciation and understanding of each other's traditions, and which may involve through communication, dialogue, so on and so forth. So here, that's one thing that I would really like to suggest. And then, on my part, I also pray that the Buddha Dharma continues for a long time. And there are parts of the world, including, Tibet, China, and Mongolia, in historically Buddhist regions where due to tragic situations, Buddha Dharma has declined due to external, internal factors. And in these areas, on my part, I pray that the Buddha Dharma that has declined be revived and flourish. And on your part as well, as fellow Buddhists, in your prayer, please remember the fellow Buddhists who are suffering in these different parts of the world where historically Buddhist traditions flourished, but now are going through decline. And so please pray for this. And and furthermore, I feel that generally when we talk about the followers of the Buddha, I talk broadly in terms of two major traditions, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. And that's one way of looking at the two main streams of Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist tradition that survives today. And the dialogue between these two are important. For example, on my part, I visited the Bodh Gaya temple quite often, the stupa quite often, and there is a Thai temple and a monastery there. And as part of my pilgrimage to the Bodh Gaya, I also have the opportunity to interact with the Thai, fellow Buddhists over there. So these kind of dialogue, I think, is really important. And for these dialogues, we actually also need to be more patient, to allow more space so that one can really delve deeper into understanding each other's interpretation of the Dharma. And also one thing that we have to remember is that in many parts of the world, beyond people who are taking interest in Buddhism as a religious teaching, there are also many people in the world who are looking at Buddhism for its deep psychology, teachings on psychology, teachings on philosophy, the science of mind, and not necessarily relating to Buddhism as a religion, but Buddhism as a source of knowledge, as a source of teaching, as a source of insight. And in this kind of time, I think it is important for us, Buddhists, while helping fellow Buddhists to continue to flourish the Dharma, but also serve this broader community, the secular world, where people are looking at Buddhism as a source of spiritual resources, teaching, insights, and so on. So I think the key point here is that we need more interaction and contact among ourselves first.
Oh yeah, 当然了的，这么影响很多的嘛，我的还是龙，他是成个不就的，的的嘛是到处落个人的，巴黎街头马斯的巴扎那苏的，拍街头这么样是不多全部，南无大师巴嘎瓦多阿拉哈多三亚三不得谁，今天的扎上不杨的我左边上去，带了查查罗斯。这个大概对吧？最近的今天的正面年度，正面年把那么就长的，伽马萨达尔玛写下完那书说，他的今天的就给龙那了干啥吧？给龙的介绍是，给龙得到，那么就今天的了说吧，什么写说，今天的那个是干啥吧？给龙的甚至那不他不叫我的两人当明暗的把打来，阳的往打我叫我的，都给我的，一没得我的，努不叫我的，日个吃到我叫我的，两人人打我，我说的叫我吃，这不是个老人敌人的，我倒看到电视上也给。동해 시에서 구주 방어서 고봉원도 저 시작했다 고den원도 지하디 승구도가 에네 간다 냐라 녀몽문주 봐도 고내야체 르마 이승구 니주 라포조 직동 되는 조조 에네 가다 성로던 요다네 에네 띵지 레베 시체 애니 싫어글라와 담에다고 싫어글라와 꼼니 애니 가다 섬려야 요태야지기 어디 숨기요래 라고 숨기냐네 사진제 인도 명한테 뭐 달래 양한다 원다와 저와도 동해와도 이메도와도 누버 저와도 리괴치 똑버 저와도 양에 랜다와 무슨도 저 저버시고 라면 디인데스 강 대니 저번야워 셔고 시우스 시우 강신의 결론다 데르 결론 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 르르 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 초나로 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 성로 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신 denpa xixin chen chanpa dan denpa jikden ye napsun dang yi midewa nambar sani chela jesu dashing naso gelong da chidar gelong ni lulu luji jesu dashing nasam gelong da dina gelong ni gombar song ham xingzhu du song ham kangdo du song di kimu zhong jie de lu changbu sangxin chanpa chanpa ka chao de naso 다 ngā rā lūgin dūlū tī tī chī kī nām nā kī chū tī tī sā kī tī sōng kū rī tā tī nē sō ngā nē mī ndō tī ā tī sū chē yō tī sō sō kū tā yī kī sāng lū tā nē wā tā sū yā tā tī tā mā ngā rā kī mū chū chē tī lū chāng pū sā shī chāng pā rā kā chō tī nē sō tēnī 전신도 우무버 세워다 전신도 우 총체도 우 링도 노무나 우 링도 무소 냠도 양다고 지저워셔도 셰소 우 링도 총나 우 링도 총오 냠도 양다고 지저워셔도 셰소 우 통우 무나 우 통우 무소 냠도 양다고 지저워셔도 셰소 우 통우 총나 우 통우 총오 냠도 양다고 지저워신 저도 셰소 류기 탐제 양다고 용신 우 무소 냠도 로버체도 류기 탐제 양다고 용신 풍오 냠도 로버체도스 류긴도지 신도 전에 우 무소 냠도 로버체도 류긴도시 신도 전에 오 충오 냠도 로버체도 결론단 뜻이 빼나 자겐남 자겐이 년에 개회 평로 거와는 릉도 수나양 릉도 수보 냠도 로도 셰소 통우 수나양 통우 수보 냠도 로도 셰소 결론다 대신도 결론이 오 릉도 몸나 오릉 무수 릉도 무수 냠도 양다고 지도셔도 셰소 오 릉도 충나양 오 릉도 충오 냠도 양다고 지도셔도 셰소 오 통우 몸나 오 통우 무소 냠도 양다고 지도셔도 셰소 오 통우 충나 오 통우 충오 냠도 양다고 지도셔도 셰소 류기 탐제 양다고 용신 오 무소 냠도 로버체도 류기 탐제 양다고 무신 말에 류기 탐제 양다고 용신 오 풍우 냠도 로버체도 류긴도지 신도 장네 오 무소 냠도 로버체도 류긴도지 신도 장네 오 충우 냠도 로버체도 대단한 난게 류르 류지 제수 다시 내봐이노 치 류르 류지 제수 다시 내봐이노 배지 난게 류지도 우지 숨고 있어래 치 류르 류지 제수 다시 내봐이노 난다 치 류르 류지 네 류지 제수 다시 내봐다 류르 근주 최수 제수 최수 제수 다시 내봐다 류르 지배 최수 제수 다시 내봐 류르 근주와다 지벌 제수 다시 내봐이노 대라 류 여도 냠도 치시 니도 시바 쌈당 수수 참보쌈 수수 참보쌈도 참바냐와 내봐 주신 대범매봐 내봐던 지된나 가야 냐와를 뭐 미치도 결론다 대달 결론이 류기 제수 다시 내봐요 결론다 샹야 결론이 존나다 조 냠도 저도 셰소 답에 때도 전시돼야 송구도가 그다 파유 전에 심 진리기 저랑 가르쳐 드제 돈하게 매버신이 간연을 다 매버셔 류지 저랑 가르쳐 나게 맞춰 가르쳐 조조 이게 남도 강조가 되디 전시 선보시는 조거리스 어디 송구도 정원은 다 정원 냠도 저도 셰소 누구는 다 누구 냠도 저도 셰소 냐와는 다 냐로 냠도 저도 셰소 Tei Luni Chita Chita Rodu Chaba Tene Teta Rodu Sheso. Tedra Nangi Lula Luji Chesu Tashi Nebata. Chi Lula Luji Chesu Tashi Nebata. Nangi Lula Chi Lula Luji Chesu Tashi Nebata. Lula Kundu Junga Chuji Chesu Tashi Nebata. Lula Jibi Chuji Chesu Tashi Nebata. Lula Kundu Junga Dan Jibi Chesu Tashi Nebayino. Tela Lu Yodo Nyamdo Chisi Nidu Sheba Sondo Susu Chamba Sondo Chamba Nyawa Neba Gyushin. Teba Meba Neba Jidena Kaya Nyawa Lema Michitu Gelonda. Tēdara gelōni lūla lūji chisu tashi neba yinu. Gelōnda shēnyāng gelōni rōwa da tōkwa shī shindu cheba da, chūngsē tēba da, nāmbar tēba shī shindu cheba da, guba da, jāngwa shī shindu cheba da, namjā da chūgyo da, lūngsī jāngwa shī shindu cheba da, sēba da, tōngwa da, cheba da, nyāngwa shī shindu cheba da. 샹와도 지외래 시신도 제보도 송와도 대바 정와도 독보도 냐와도 매년와도 뭐와도 미모와도 시신도 지대다 난게 룰러 결론도 대서 결론을 룰러 지수 룰러 류지 지수 다시 내가 있는 결론도 샹양 결론기 니 디니라 강베티 연세 자당고 면세나 빠빠로 투고 보도 메서 나서에 강화 양다고 지도하신도 소소 도대스 다 르메서 정신이 뭐 그러다 아니 동요 정신이 버디도 저 살롱 거인 거로 다 간다 르 도쟁기 님이 삼 되네 봐 대인도 군중기 아니 생부 초에 타네 아니 생두 못이고요 다 뒤에도 쉐인도 달은 녀부 여더매 녀부된도 여더매 녀부된 여나 녀부 컨디스된 거예요. 어디 뒤에 그림 뭐는 뭐는 좀 보시고 그림 제도가
So let me read a little bit from the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. So the sutta begins with the preamble, setting the context where the sutta discourse was given. So this is in the land of Kurs, in a place called Karmasadama. And then the sutta opens with the statement in exchange between the Buddha and the Sangha members who were there. And then the first opening of the sutta after the preamble sets up a very important passage where the Buddha says that there is amongst this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, for the realization of nibbana, that is to say, the four foundations of mindfulness. So in this opening sentence or a passage, the core of the Buddha's teaching is summed up, particularly what is the final goal of the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma. The final goal of the Dhamma is the attainment of cessation in the form of nibbana. And here, and the way, the actual path by which one attains that nibbana is articulated in the form of, although not explicitly stated here, but in the form of what is known as the threefold training. And the threefold training is a very progressive practice where we begin with first restraining the gross levels of negative actions of body, speech, and mind by applying mindfulness and clear knowing, awareness. And then by applying these two faculties, we begin to exercise restraint on the expressions of the afflictions, such as attachment, anger, and so on. So the first level is application of these on the level of body and speech. And then we move on to the next practice, which is the second training, which is the training in concentration. And the concentration, at that point, we are now beginning to deal with our mind beyond body and speech. We're dealing with the mind. And part of that training involves first cultivating the ability to apply our mind and attain some attentional focus. So that's part of the training. And the concentration or samadhi is like the basis, the foundation. And the actual practice is really prajna, wisdom. And then the wisdom of no self or wisdom of shunyata, emptiness, is the core content. The essence of the path is really the wisdom, the training and wisdom. So this opening passage really presents this entire path in an implicit way by pointing out what is the ultimate goal of the Dhamma, the path of Dhamma. So then Buddha goes on to explain what the four foundations of mindfulness practice are. He begins by explaining the importance of adopting the right body posture, finding a quiet place for practice, and finding, sort of first beginning to discipline your body and adopt a certain posture so that you can settle your mind. And then the practice goes on to first the introduction to the mindful breathing, the mindful breathing. And the mindful breathing is explained in a quite detailed way by bringing awareness to the actual act of breathing, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in long, breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out, out short. So every time we breathe, depending upon the pace of the breath, you maintain your awareness. So the two faculties that are being applied here are sati or smriti, mindfulness, and samprajnana, which is the meta-awareness, or sometimes translated also as clear awareness. So these are the two faculties that are being applied in focused on the breath. And then the text then goes on to explain about, how by choosing, taking the breath as the object of meditation, one begins to then bring deeper awareness and mindfulness, and then contemplation of body as body, and abiding with that mindfulness. And then the text moves on to explaining the importance of how we need to bring that mindfulness and awareness, not only when we are sitting in a practice, but also in everyday life. And then it talks about the four postures of the body: when lying down, when standing up, when moving, and when sitting down. So, and it goes into detail, but the point here is that the mindfulness and meta-awareness or samprajnana has to be applied constantly, because we know from our personal experience that a lot of the problems and mental agitations really come when we are not able to exercise some discipline on our mind. We let our mind to run free, run without discipline, unrestrained, and then all sorts of problems arise. So although paying attention to the body is important, and the attention to the body is a way of training your mind, so that ultimately the main aim is to really apply mindfulness and meta-awareness on the mind itself, moving from body to feeling, then to mind. So I think this is where, and then in the sutta, example is given, how do we train this awareness? And one of the examples given here is how a potter, an expert potter, spins the wheel and is aware that whether he has spin hard, which would spin for long, whether he has spin short, which will spin for less time. And the potter, through the expertise, knows what kind of spinning he or she has done. So in the same manner, a meditator will be able to maintain the mindfulness and meta-awareness in a disciplined manner. So in this way, what is happening here is the instruction to us that we need to apply mindfulness and awareness, at the level of our body, at the level of our speech, in relation to our speech, and most importantly, in relation to our mind, in relation to our mind. So as part of the, mindfulness on the body, there is also a more detailed explanation on how we can do this by, looking at different aspects of the body, different constituents that make up our body, and not only listing them, but also reflecting upon their nature as, foulness and made of, impure substances. And the point here is to really remind us the truth of suffering. The existence, existence in samsara is conditioned by suffering. So the truth of suffering, and the truth of suffering, by reflecting on suffering, it will lead to inquiry into what is the origin of suffering. Why are we in this situation where we are now? And through, inquiring into the origin of suffering, we will find that the origin of suffering lies not outside, it lies within us. It's in our mind, it's in our emotions. So once we recognize that, then the question is asked, is there a way to bring about an end to the origin of suffering, thereby bringing an end to the suffering? And that opens up to the question of, asking about nibbana or cessation, nirodha. And in this way, what you find here is actually a very, an approach that is very close to the actual way things work in the world. This whole kind of approach of the path is the suffering and its origin, searching for its cure, and the healing, and where does that healing come from, which is the path. And in this way, if you think about the teaching of the Dhamma, Buddha as encompassed in this kind of teaching, there is something very remarkable that is actually very close to the way reality itself is.
수수타는 도디 아주 지 양원망의 소송 코돌이야 냐다 잘해요나 링시점때 신 흘려요나 아니 지금 판바연제 항마연제 도 썼던야지 아니 꼭하면 코돌이야 아니 야네 코돌이야 수수타는 도 개발을 동거래선도 순요리 세상 아래는 차샤네 수수타는 도디 차상 스비 전에다 아니 마타 임베 야네 거돌이야 도 개발이 또 떠야지 더 대가다 에네 결론기 지금 로차 녀도 베데 쉬우지 14호지 송도가 어디디 수수타는 도 개발이 아주 소송 거돌이야 자신이 던거야 지기 로다도스레 다 되게 결론기 지 로차 년도 저些참물로지나 소인 것도가 다 들으시리.
So, talking about this importance of applying mindfulness and, awareness to everyday activity, particularly for the monastic members, here it is important to recall that as part of our monastic vows, every fortnightly, we have to participate in a confession ceremony. So the tradition is during the confession ceremony, the abbot, the senior Sangha member has to recite the Pratimoksha Sutra. And if there is a rush, at least the preamble part of the Pratimoksha Sutra has to be chanted, if possible, the entire sutra. And so in the Tibetan tradition, during the fortnightly ceremony, regardless of whatever version of length it is, the Pratimoksha Sutra is chanted. And the 13th Dalai Lama, my predecessor, actually really kind of emphasized to the monastic community that at least during the rainy season retreat, at least once the entire long Pratimoksha Sutra should be chanted as part of the confession ceremony. And this is something that I do. I also had the opportunity to memorize the whole Pratimoksha Sutra myself. And at least once a year during the rainy season retreat, I chanted in the congregation. So if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra, it's very detailed in the way in which monastic members are advised to bring mindfulness and awareness into everyday activity. It lists literally all the aspects of activity among a monastic member engages in. It's very detailed. So these really are, of course, explaining the precepts, But the most importantly, it is explaining how it is important to maintain awareness and mindfulness as a monastic member throughout, our day and night, by applying these kind of faculties to our everyday action.
전에 어디 나가서 루주 지금에 패실링을 시부유 고고메 자가식 살아야 아니 고고메다 아니 dansasolya yane kodulo sosotabon dojaba tongore saji dosin tempem nang yins shanda ngariya masan la chiya sambor minjuro sa ede lavya samlya ligitus chene kundu ko home ada ligum sila de shasha de jan de sonsha chene oda ngedi sosotabon dojaba de 로르시 에테가 별에 사직 니스탄버리 아니 개체도 단서서 아니 이안에 그도로 도저 녀워도 동거를 센도스 고고메다 템범 넘버리 저는 알아줬다 이안에 그도로야 단서 숨그 참배 지다 단서 쳐가지고 이안에 그도로 소소다번 도저 마도는 뭐어야지 어디 다 도시대요.
So
대나로 에네 간다지 조차 년도 그 결론을 지야디디 비 실사고 시우지 송도가 어다디 소소사반도 아주 로르신 에네 지금 마타 임베 이 안에 그도로 도제와 차상시마도 순까지 되 계시부르샤.
So this is a kind of a story, but it was my own late tutor, Gyabje Rinpoche, who was informed by the 13th Dalai Lama, the predecessor, the Dalai Lamas, who told Ling Rinpoche that one of the things that the 13th Dalai Lama has done is to really institute the tradition that the major monasteries should at least once a year during the rainy season retreat have the senior member recite the long Pratimoksha Sutra. And the important point here is that when you recite the Pratimoksha Sutra, you cannot read it. You have to chant it from heart. So whoever is going to be the senior member who chants the Pratimoksha Sutra, it has to be done from heart. That's the historical tradition. So in my own case, I was able to do it once in Tibet before we left, but in India, I've had the opportunity to chant this several times. And I also have asked the major monastic universities in the Tibetan community, particularly the three large monastic universities that are re-established in South India, as well as many other major monasteries. I have asked them to make sure that the tradition that the 13th Dalai Lama has established to have the extensive Pratimoksha Sutra chanted by heart by the senior member during the rainy season retreat be observed. So this is what is happening here today, which I'm happy to know. But the point is that if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra as a fully ordained monk, you will recognize that how many aspects of the Pratimoksha Sutra are instructions on how, as a fully ordained monk, one should live one's life on a daily basis, and what kind of mindful awareness one needs to bring in every aspect of the activity in one's life.
디 캠프 년조 가서 소종크도 캠프 캠프랑 로리야 그저 턴도 모두 맞던 디네 디때 모두 디디 로를 매버도 되디 에양 디 오메 내데 제브지리야 디 소로 나왔잖아 어다 독선님이 구용사도 제가 나서도 야 가셔 소소하면 도지하고 등기유스 근데 그럴 수 있는 것이 빼도는 등기유스 뒤에야 더서 라라고 차버려.
So given that the tradition historically is for the chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra be done from heart, by the senior member of the monastic congregation. There is also quite a liberal tradition where if the senior member is not able to chant the entire sutra, but there will be others who will pick up where the senior member and the abbot left. So it's not as if one person should be able to chant the entire sutra from heart, from start to finish, but the sutra needs to be chanted in full, and it needs to be chanted from the heart. So that has been the tradition. So sometimes I do hear some Tibetan monasteries saying that we also observe this tradition of having the long sutta chanted during the summer retreat, rainy season retreat. But then they say, and then when I ask them, who memorizes it? They say, no, we actually read it from the text. So that's not really how it was historically, the tradition.
Oh yeah. Also gelonzu ane soso saban dodi lolya sinche. Hodadi yango mango soson kodulya kuzu tudugi ma kembu ma song. Endi yang chodi di ane ne den woma digi tu sungche. Di kashim sharisha.
So this, just to repeat, emphasize, I think this tradition that is part of the monastic life of fortnightly chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra, and especially when it is chanted the long version, that the senior member, the abbot starts, and then where the senior member abbot needs to take a rest, another elder member takes over. But and this tradition of chanting the Pratimoksha Sutra, at least during the fortnightly ceremony, I think is a beautiful one, and we should make sure that it remains that way.
Yeah, that day and zhag and call teda nang lulu gelonda teda gelone lulu luji jisu tashin never gelonda shanyang gelon keni lun dinyi la gangbe ti yense zhadang go menshe na bakba la tuku badu mezangwa nazo ye kangwa yang dawa jida wa shindu susu dode lun nila ni zhada buda semo da soda bokshun da shada gyubo da ribo da gang ribe gangba da kema da ning da cheba da lo da chimbo da gyumo da nyema da gangba da chisa da chiba da baigen da na da cha da nguju da sha da mikshu da sha da lu da no da chusi da jino yodo oshi gyalong da didade pena zhu na so je kan ne didade solu da zhu da mensan diu da mensan diu tang del da zhu so je kan ne teni migdan de mig shede tana didade deni de solu yeno deni zhu yeno deni mensan diu yeno deni mensan diu yeno deni te yeno deni zhu yeno she gelong da teshin do gelong ge lu deni la gangbe te yen she zha dang go menshe na baba la tu ge ba do mezang wa na zo ye kang wa yang da ba chi da wa shin do su su do de lu de la ne zha da bu dang she so ne jin na ye do she da da nang ge she so ne gelong da te da gelong ne lu la lu ji chi su da she na ba yin gelong da shanyang gelong ge lu deni chidir neba chidir shakwa kamje yang dawa chidawa shindu susu tobar chedi lu nila ni saya kawda chuye kawda maya kawda lunga kaw yodo oshi gelo nida de pena palang sebang palang sebe loma kebe chun nipa palang sene shindu shambu no tumburu shakde ndukde susu tobar di shindu gelong da gelong kene lu dini chidir neba chidir shakwa kamje yang dawa chidawa shindu susu tobar chedi lu nila ni saya kawda chuye kawda maya kawda lunga kaw yodo oshi dadana nangi lu la lu ji jesu dawa neba tang sheso ne gelong da deshindu gelong ni lu la lu ji jesu dashi neba yeno gelong da shanyang pena di dadi gelong kene tujudu poro ro shine shashi lembang shine shanyi lembang shine shasung lembang nambar pambang nambar ngebang oda nambar deba menzo nambar nakba da tongwa na 대인이 륜디안 디데비 추전다 디데비 로시전인데 디데볼레 만데보고 시 륜디자 추테다 조르체도스 대다르 난게 셔서네 결론도 대다르 결론이 룰을 루지쳐서 다시 내버린다 결론도 셔야 앞에는 디데디 결론은 두주도 보러 저러는 게 싸움 출라는 게 싸움 자그 다게 싸움 자가가는 게 싸움 키는 게 싸움 딱다게 싸움 공는 게 싸움 정교다게 싸움 소샤기 리버 소샤기 리 나버 나서다게 싸워 통하나 대인이 륜디안 디데비 추전다 디데비 러시제 인디 디데올레 만데보 시 륜디니장 추 대단 저어셔도 대단한 게 셔서네 결론다 대단 결론이 룰을 루지쳐서 다시 내버리는 결론다 시행 결론께는 두루두 송 보러로 리베킹 샤다 차다 제시 기베 저와도 통하나 시소 아마신다 리베킹르도 샤다 차 러지 차고 메시 기베 저와도 통하나 시소 아마신다 리베킹르도 샤다 차다 제시 기베 저와도 통하나 시소 아마신도 리버지고 기베 만져 차다 차는서 나버 토로데 라베 리버는 샤나 강베 리버는 자 샤나 야 롱부 리버 남자 샤나 장아리 리버 남자 샤나 라이 리버 남자 샤나 개베 리버 남자 샤나 지메 리버 남자 샤나 게시 리버 남자 샤나 뿡부 리버 남 샤나 징베 리버 남 샤나 잠베 리버 남 샤나 소이 리버 남 샤나 고요 퇴바다 퇴바 샤나 통하나 대니 륜디냐 추 대단 저어 제도스 다되기 류 동해의 신이버디 상당한 것도 봐 아니 류 차시에 도면 뒤에 신이버 있잖아요 류기 공부디 또 스타트잖아 아니 랑섬을 시기 매도 될래 고알리기도 봐 쟤는 어디다 두스래
So now the sutra then goes on to contemplation of the different aspects of the body that make up our body, and the importance of bringing awareness into the specific parts of our body in a very distinct way. An analogy given here is in a marketplace when you have many different types of varieties of grain, and if you look at each of these, you are able to identify distinctly what types of grain this is. So a meditator, when contemplating the body, looking at the specific parts of the body, identifies and contemplates on the specific parts of body as they are. And furthermore, it points towards understanding that ultimately the body, all of these parts are composed of impure substances, which are not worthy to be attached to, not worthy to be attracted to. And part of that contemplation also involves another aspect, which is to reflect upon how, at the final level, our body is composed of the four elements, the elements of earth, water, fire, and so on. And what we think as a real thing, like a body, something that is independent and solid, is actually divisible in these different elements that make it up together. And then the meditation takes us to contemplation on the charnel ground by looking at body corpse, which is in various different stages of decomposition, as well as body parts that have been kind of cut, split open, and so on and so forth. And the point here is to, by visiting the charnel ground, viewing the body, bringing awareness, being mindful, recognizing the various stages of decomposition that we see, but then relating to it to our own body and say that this body is of the same nature. So this body, this here refers to our own body. this body is of the same nature, will become like that. It is not exempt from that state. So what this is pointing us to is, by using this meditation, contemplation, we are also pointing towards recognizing the nature of suffering, recognizing the nature of suffering. So this is an important point of this kind of meditation. And indirectly, this kind of meditation also points towards the teaching on no self, because underlying our attachment to body is an assumption of some kind of independent body that is out there, that is real, that is worthy to be attached to, that is mine. But when you are able to contemplate on the nature of body being composed of so many parts, so beyond these parts that make up the body, there is no body that is separate from the parts that make it up. So this deconstruction or reduction of body into different parts through contemplation is also a helpful practice for deconstructing our attachment that assumes that there is an independent body that is graspable, that is worthy of attachment. So in this way, it's also pointing towards the teaching on no self, anatta.
대다다 류 잡아내샤스니 류가 나당도 상로던 류를 지 현샤래야로 저저디 수송저지 용서로 되네 개체의 초 잡아내샤 초 대화를 세 초동을 민두부 접지 쳐고 될 때는 상로 남자기야로 지 현대님도로 차도기야서 저저디 다파 용기에 인도산에 초 잡아내샤 다 상당히 초디도 전에 가서를 보게 또 심도서 상당히 타직도 초 대화를 현대화도 초 등을 민주별로 기아 뜻을 수송도야 초 잡아내샤 류 잡아내샤 초 잡아내샤 엔데네 다 초디도 뜻을 때야 됐다 심기 요기 요인도산에 다 제 심 잡아니 샤사디기 애니 파도 십사로 다네 심기 땡네 더버 애니 가서를 보게 이동하지를 세외 유지를 배 당도래하게 차고 애니 동행어야를 옆에 겹지 소안에 면도 겹지 소에 로 당로 저저리 파도 시임지다지 심 잡아니 샤 다 되네마 애니 최 전번이셔 스전에 다 되게 차단께서 유디즈 저디 건드지 이미 파도 십사고 돌아 삼다 애니 심 디두디에 십사고 돌아 삼다는 전에 애니 조조서 매도지기 애니 간다다 타르도나 애니 더 우모베 슝네 송야게 다 민섬 다섬 자 디가로 조데게도가 독신 삼등기요리.
So so through first contemplating body and cultivating mindfulness based on this, already when we do the contemplation mindfulness of the body, there will be an impact on the lessening of our attachment, because a large part of our attachment is based upon attraction to things that are connected with our body. So that is an important one. But more importantly, after contemplation of the body, one needs to move to feeling, because a part of the problem really comes from our attachment to pleasurable sensations and our natural aversion to unpleasurable experiences and sensation. So we react to the world through this modality of attraction and aversion, and underlying that modality is an attachment towards or craving towards a pleasurable experience and aversion towards something that we don't like. So the feeling is, it becomes important, and mindfulness practice on feeling, focused on feeling, will allow us to be less extreme in our reaction to pleasure and pain, and happiness and suffering, so that there is less kind of anxiety, because underlying craving is a lot of anxiety, and also and along with it also comes jealousy and many of the other problems. So beyond body, one needs to tackle the attachment to feeling. So that's the second part. And then if we go deeper, again, where do these attachment to feeling come from? Why are we reacting to feelings, pleasurable and unpleasurable, in this way? We will come to recognize that underlying this is really our state of mind, different disturbed states of mind, and various states of mind. And also, a large part of the attachment is constructed by the mind's attraction towards an object, and sort of, a construction or a superimposition of attractiveness to things in the world. So it's the mind that brings conceptualization and adds attributes to things, and it's the mind that is doing a lot of the work. So by looking at the mind, one brings differentiation, because mind is not one monolithic state. We need to bring differentiation to mind that are more in the category of attachment leaning, attraction leaning, mind that are more in the category of aversion, which manifest in extreme form as anger, hatred, and so on. So when we are able to move from feeling to mind, we are now looking at a deeper level of the states of motivation, intention, and emotions, and so on. So now, when we move from the mind meditation to the mind object, mental objects, then we are really getting to a subtler state where, in fact, even though the text may not explicitly state this, but we are moving towards something like the teaching on anatta or shunyata as presented in the Madhyamaka teachings. Because what we come to recognize is that many of the things that we believe to exist out there are constructs of our mind. And by recognizing constructs as constructs, we also recognize that there is nothing solid with the reality, independent existence out there. And in this way, the whole basis for attachment will be undermined. So we can see in the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, a progressive or progression of deeper understanding of body moving to feeling, then to mind, and then finally to mental objects or phenomena.
Tadi nedi indarish tenje samtangi yore zawashiru ada chushu di tenje jawa jo gagbo meba kemeba chane ngolo tene nyambe cheba kyangani gagbo meba kemeba ene tulu tene chaba meba tak meba ene zhong yu zhong meba ene owa meba zhong meba ene dala tene tate temi tenshimi oda tedebi zhawa tada nyawa shiwe tsenji jengi ene zhe dongwa nigang do ene samdachi tenga nindarish ada zawashiriku chushidi gyawani nindarish samdangi zawa sanje mana ki tambatala chachalo sada de ene kobe sawshishidwa.
So in my own daily practice, one of the key meditations I do is based on the opening salutation verse in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, where Nagarjuna pays homage to the Buddha for teaching the truth of dependent origination in terms of emptiness. And there, in the Sholaka, Nagarjuna talks about how the teaching on no self or emptiness is presented from the point of view of the nature of things themselves, where the sort of belief in the arising and cessation in an intrinsic way is negated. From a temporal perspective, then belief in enduring permanence or believing in annihilation after existence is negated. And then from the point of view of activity, intrinsic going and intrinsic coming are negated. And then from the point of view of labeling, then the grasping to things as being distinct or separate, or identity and difference is negated. And then Nagarjuna goes on to say that to you, the great teacher who has taught this truth of dependent origination in terms of the absence of these, extremes, I pay homage. So this is an important stanza for me, and I chant it regularly, daily basis, and meditate on its meaning.
Yeah, that's enough. Totally.
So we will now have the question and answers. Yeah.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. This is indeed a blessed teaching program to have a great teacher by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, to teach and share with us this progressive path to realization through the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So we have many questions from the monastic as well as ladies from audience to ask His Holiness. But due to time constraint, we can only take a few questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. So this is a gentle reminder for you. When you ask the question, please unmute the mic. And after questioning, remember to mute again the mic and keep the video open. We shall keep the room calm and creating a conducive learning environment so that our mind feel with joy and happiness. Your Holiness, Venerable Pundarit Sri Punyo from Thailand is not available now. So allowing me to ask the question on his behalf. His Holiness, do you have any advice for Dharma learners to know we are on the right path? Thank you.
다들 최제가 산지기 최사디 대버지고 뭐인고 콘조단의 일이 상당고 이들자는 게 로송셔도 잘 개셔버리. 에네 투중기 싫어, 섬중기 싫어, 곰중기 싫어 쓰는 도 슬레임 것도가 서서 토마 터섬 지하디 시부지 개셔버리셔. 에네 자주 쳐줘서 다 지금 발리기 흉이네리 에네 레자가 흉이네리 되서 로송 나야디 숙셔스 나로 나서는 쉬야이.
So, when we are talking about the path and Dharma practice in the Buddhist context, we are talking about an approach of a spiritual path that is not based on devotion and faith alone. What is required also is an understanding and knowledge. So this is very important for the Buddhist path. And here, as I explained yesterday, there is an understanding that a genuine understanding of the Dharma arises in a gradual way through the 3 stages of understanding of first through study and learning, second through contemplation and integration, and third through meditative cultivation. So my request to all of my colleagues, Dharma friends, is to really not ignore the importance of studying, to study the Dharma, whether it is Pali text or whatever Sanskrit tradition or whatever tradition that you are engaged with. It is important to study and cultivate the knowledge and then contemplate. That is something that I would like to share.
And the Jewish Sumarbe, Tambu Jajin to Manduze, Paulu Suru Tamja Tamborsha, Tamanize, Kuntu Nyamsula, Kuya Dambaje Chedongo, Sadi, that Nibu Tusha.
So, for example, the great Tibetan master Tsongkhapa, the 14th century master, sums up his biography, autobiography in the following way. He said, at first, I cultivated, wide learning through study. And secondly, I ensured that all the teachings of the Buddha dawned upon me as personal instructions. And then third, I then engaged day and night in meditative cultivation. And in this way, I've been able to dedicate all of my virtues to the flourishing of the Dharma and well-being of sentient beings. So that really sums up what a true practitioner's life should look like.
퇴사 맞으나 퇴바 매베 공부니 럭둥 차를 제거 자스 진짜 숨수요래.
So there's a Tibetan saying that a meditation without learning is like someone with no fingers trying to climb a rock.
Oh yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable People Kamo Kesopon from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Venerable, with my highest respect to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, refer to the world crisis, and many people, they got a problem and they don't know how to find a way to make them peacefulness. So my question is, how we apply the Maha Satipatthana Sutta to make them become a peacefulness again? Thank you.
디 덕이 안다 쉬스물이 류 잠반이샤 아니 되네 초 잠반이샤 되네 심 잠반이샤 되네 취 잠반이샤스 도다 토마 라바체 되네 류레다 심도스 야 차르주요레 류 잠반이샤 초 잠반이샤 심 잠반이샤 되네 네 취 잠반이샤스 저 도스 상당나 좀 전에 얘기했듯이 맞아 지금 머름기 진짜 룩줄이야 치변한 시선에 타마 라번에도 야우시치도가 저상 안에서 디삼다다 디로종시 아니 디도네 이 삼다다 셔버존나 다가 저기도
So as I already mentioned how when practiced properly, the Satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, can be a very powerful path. We already talked about how contemplation on the body, bringing mindfulness and awareness onto the body, can really create a basis for living a more peaceful life. And when you look at the Satipatthana, a structure, what we see is a gradual progression, first from the focus on the body, which is easier and it's more obvious. The object is more evident and obvious. Then gradually moving into feeling, which is still comparatively subtle, but compared to mind, it's still easier to focus on. And then moving on to mind, which is subtler, and then gradually to the mind objects of the mind. So in this way, there's something very beautiful in the natural progression from what is easier and more evident and obvious object to a progressively subtler and elusive object. And if you think about it, this is truly a great compassion and kindness on the part of our teacher, the Buddha. It's almost as if he laid out a path where we are being instructed from the beginner stage, like a kindergarten and a primary school education, then gradually being led us through the advanced higher levels of education. So if you can afford to spend time, study, and then engage in contemplation, there will be the basis for a peaceful mind and peaceful life.
아주 부인하려야 아니 근주 부디 자시다 아니 땡주 부디 이게스 저래 어디 디디게 로 장다디리 배 배싱이 들로토리 생리도 tumbo 뭐에는 tumbo신 또 스마 치단지 쇼야고래샤 다 개지시 소소 롬니자데 베케셔부리.
So in the Tibetan tradition, for example, our canonical collection is quite large. So the sutta collection, or the scripture attributed to the Buddha, contains over 100 volumes. And then the commentarial collection, which is known as Tengyu, contains over 200 volumes. And I often tell people, which I truly believe, that if you look at the content of these teachings, they are actually very close to a scientific way of thinking about things. It's really about understanding the nature of reality, understanding the nature of our own existence. So by spending time to cultivate the knowledge, to study them, and then bring them into contemplation is a worthy pursuit.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Dr. Nima Senaragne from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Morning, His Holiness Dalai Lama. Ayubowan. My question is, breathing is an involuntary action. Don't you think if you make it a voluntary action, will slow down our creative and active mind, diverse in mental energy to an unnecessary task? Thank you very much. Bhoma Stuti.
다디 우중우 장장 캐시부지게 말와. 가당한서 우중우 그도이네 있다. 조차 년도 거꾸리네 우중우 용구여봐. 자상가다 sem기 또 올리아 미니 아니 심파 네트도 샤나 아니 sem기다 가서 그렇게 잡아니 월샤와 디도 남중아서 로디 베트칼 미국 드럼 멘탈도 토르테 하버도에 가서 공연 시험을 근데 치르기 수조로 사월을 미네 아니 로들레 연구여봐 미긴치가 어봐 다 예루디 걸 삼다 중구여봐 다 예루디 아니 공연 시험에 되게 로로 차대버 디디기 쉬고 뭐시 버시 걸 예루 코란 거 간에도 sesam rigsam di dos pa la nyambar shaw surgery do samtana di pando do what is
the point is it's the point of mindfulness, of breathing meditation, is not that breathing is such a sacred thing or it's something that is special or something amazing. The point is to recognize something that we naturally and normally do as part of our human existence. And by using that natural human activity, effortless activity, as a way of anchoring our attention training. So what we are doing is we are bringing conscious attention to something that we do effortlessly by using that experience as a way of anchoring our attention. So when we are able to anchor our attention, then we learn to apply our mind. We learn to cultivate the mental discipline, because otherwise, what happens is that, most of the time, our mind chases after the sensory objects. So of course, we have 5 sensory consciousness, and then we have the mental consciousness. All the 5 sensory experiences are always chasing after external objects of the 5 senses. And even the mental consciousness, which is manas, the 6th mental faculty, is supposed to be really about mind. But even then, for most of the time, the mental faculty also, mental consciousness also chases after what the sensory experiences give you. So we tend to be so externally oriented. So by choosing to consciously focus on a breath, what we are doing is to learning a skill to be able to refrain from chasing after the senses and retain the mental consciousness and cognition to remain at the manas level. And in this way, what happens is a kind of a quietening of a mind takes place. Gradually, as the mind rests and settles, we then begin to experience what consciousness is, which is pure experience in the form of luminosity, just simple awareness. And in this way, one could say one almost is able to cultivate what could be called a state of equipoise. So that, and when we're able to cultivate that kind of ability to consciously apply our mind through a disciplined attention, there's a real benefit. There's a real benefit from this.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Chitani Bara Surya from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, it's look like that there is an inseparable connection between Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana. Why is it not possible to make them one? Thank you very much.
Yeah, some Chabani Shasati Migu Chi Suzur Sobati membership. Kada Yulutine Sim Sazam Rizam Jigi Lodi Gala Sim Pagita, the native Chani, Dingala Chijan Song. That in a Dinrig Sim Digi, any she drawn the Dinrig Taxer to say you do any some Giji Yudrag and Medawada, any other the Rigging Jigui Chishing some time and do Jidan doing our digital Lord Laying Gurua, any church of Shati or Layumage. Some Tabanchas the Chishan sorry. Then a church of Shan deed any casualty to some time. That's also church of one shot as a door. That's some Tabancha in the Chishan song.
So one way of looking at the relationship between mindfulness on the mind and mindfulness on the mental objects or mind objects is to really view the two, mind and mental objects, as basis and its attribute. So when you are cultivating mindfulness on the mind, what you are seeking is some ability to recognize what the mind itself is. And in order to do that, one needs to be able to move beyond, sort of objectification of body or attachment to feelings. One needs to sort of move beyond those two stages and then find a way to quieten one's mind and then remain equipoised and try to sort of experience that state of absence, which is just a clear knowing and pure awareness. So it's like the basis, and then the mindfulness on the mind objects is more like then reflecting on the attributes of that mind. So for example, like when you analyze the going and coming of that mind, when you analyze the arising and sensation of that mind, that movement, then we begin to recognize attributes like impermanence, no self, and so on. So ultimately, the most important practice is the fourth Patthana Sutta, practice, the fourth mindfulness, which is the phenomena, the nature of reality. So in simple way, one can say that the relationship between these two is that first one is establishing the basis for recognizing the mind, and then the fourth one is now recognizing the attributes, dwelling, abiding on the attributes of the mind, such as impermanence, no self, and so forth.
And those some shifts na some charak yawa cha yore. And rabo lubu sem. And nyumu hiji give sems. Chazanga rabo lubu sem ya and Rashi ju kundu di shik duga. Na Rashi go tobo sosum, chebe Rashi go tobo shibju, niedo go Rashi go tobo dun. Chene oda Rashi ju tobo di badu gabe jele ya, and sim sesam rigzamgi, and that ya, and nangji tosum sen shesha diri, or dendregita, or sim tara yawachia duga. That those yurubu kombayina, any gali samaya, the Tawa Yong de Ajita, any Nangji Tosum Gunzi do Yong Tiaji. The under Sedu Negogi, any Dobosum Sam down the Yala Peasants Nemedo, Nyala Chigo, Kumji Tangu Dancer de, any the Ni Kube Kudulia, any Semgi. Rabati the Bagale, Galepa, Shine, Tomo Gomeshiba the Baga, then a Chawa, Louis, then a Charadi Bado, Strategy, Thomas Simdi, say Shatiaj. This is a Kundri Dosiana, and she Soro Yondeada, she Sim Charag Music to Pandayori.
So in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, in understanding the nature of mind, as I mentioned yesterday, there is even a discussion of recognizing different levels of subtlety of mind and consciousness, and the movement of the mind connected with its energy. So, for example, there is an understanding of how we can move from grosser level of mind, such as the sensory experiences, to the manas. And within the manas, there's a lot of conceptual processes, thought processes, and those are still grosser level. And there's a whole list of what is referred to as the 80 conceptions that are indicative of different states of mind. So each of these are correlated to a progressive level of deepening. So there is quite a lot of distinctions, and meditators, the yogis, actually learn to recognize what the indications of the different levels of dissolutions are. And part of that practice involves using sleep as a way of training the mind, because when we begin to fall asleep, our sensory modalities are less active. So the mind is already settling down and quietening down. And so then, yogis actually use the sleep experience and process as a way of recognizing how the mind is behaving, how the mind is expressing itself in different levels of subtlety. And in this way, as you go into the actual sleep, you are still able to maintain your awareness. And then, of course, the aim is eventually to be able to recognize when these deeper states arises naturally, especially such as at the point of death, as mentioned yesterday. So, for example, like the 4 stages, each of them are associated. The first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, and they are referred to as the stage of appearance. So each of these first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, altogether making 80 conceptions, which then dissolve and culminate in the experience of clear light. So when the third stage, which is associated with the 7 conceptions, cease, then what is referred to as the innate mind, the innate fundamental, innate mind arises. And that is the most basic, most fundamental state of consciousness. And the yogi, an experienced yogi will be able to still maintain awareness at that stage.
Oh yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Praboda Nirukshi from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, I am asking, is Satipatthana meditation samatha or vipassana? Thank you.
The 신대다 항동스야디 미국권에 요치기 요마리 코칸다 미국당 것도네 신내스럽도 잡아 마시버체 심지시도 나야 내베톤에 삼다 에네 항동스럽도 잡아치야치기 신내스야디 에네 가서다 심지시도 내네 드라지다 항동스야디 에네 신의 뜻이도 내배 토네 에네 유로 소소도 싫어고 자야돼 자곰 는 항도사들이
So,
자본이샤는 이자연구리.
So the primary distinction between shamatha and vipassana, or vipassana, tranquil abiding and insight, it's not defined by differences in the object of meditation. The object of meditation can be the same. It is differentiated by the style of meditation. So in the shamatha type meditation, the main approach is a single pointedness and settledness of mind and focus. So there is no discursivity, whereas vipassana style meditation involves inquiry, like more the wisdom aspect of the mind, inquiry, analysis, discursiveness, and critical inquiry. So and this is why in the Indo-Tibetan tradition we speak of non-discursive meditation or resting meditation and analytic or discursive meditation, and they are correlated to the shamatha style or vipassana style, and you need to combine both. So for example, in the Satipatthana practice, we see both of these approaches are used in a combination way. So Satipatthana practice, the mindfulness practice contains both elements of both tranquil abiding and insight.
Oh yeah. Now next, get away.
Thank you, His Holiness. There's still remaining two more questions from the floor. We now invite Venerable Arloka, Myanmar, to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning, Your Holiness. My name is Arloka from Myanmar. I'm very happy getting opportunity to ask question to you. So today my question is, Your Holiness, when people ask you conflictable question or the negative question, how do you apply mindfulness, sati, not to be angry? Thank you very much, Your Holiness. Thank you.
Did 가게 요마래? 미자가 캐버스 아니 가서 그래. 또좀 잠만 먹고 싶지도 순제. 아니 변한다 우모주고 쇼데 대이 시신 사무 지금되는 뭔고 일이 겨우이 내가 또 준되는 산재천야 현지도수 최민주 쓰네 수선에 아니 인인의 초지랑보다 아니 초지 잡고로 서버서 저디 아니 산재성부샤르디 민장 다요상 그 대코는 일이 캔 투수요 말해서 수도가 Tito kodo sungi modo de magubi keşke marva. Di shimju shadi kanwanzu sun naloli ya kanjasi yodo zuche di shimju shadi pe keşke burisha.
So when questions like this are asked, to me personally, it doesn't really bother me, and because I actually admire the critical inquiry tradition that is part of the great Nalanda Indian tradition, where there is a lot of debate back and forth. So debate is the primary. Can someone mute the microphone? So so the debate is a primary modality in which discourse takes place. So the critical inquiry, exchange back and forth, is part of that tradition. For example, the 7th century great master Chandrakirti, in his Entering the Middle Way, towards the end, actually explicitly says, after having explained his philosophy of emptiness and his interpretation of Nagarjuna's teachings, says that the profound truth that has been presented here is so profound that even some great learned ones who have spent so much time studying the Dharma have been unable to fathom this truth. And in that list, he includes great masters like Vasubandhu and Dignaga and Dhammakirti as well. So this is the tradition that I come from. So critical inquiry and debate is part and parcel. So I don't get annoyed or bothered by difficult questions. Yeah.
His Holiness, this is the last question. We now invite Venerable Dr. Diti Sampano from Indonesia to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Honorable Sir, Your Holiness, Namo Buddhaya, my respectful to Your Highness. I'm very happy I can join this teaching, and then I have some experience about Satipatthana. Actually, my question is about Dhammanupasana, but before I heard that there is some audience, she asked about this Dhammanupasana too, and then my question is, how about how to practicing vipassana or satipatthana during we have some ritual ceremony. Sometimes because we must unite our mind and our mental body, then but in other time we must reciting of parita or mantra or etc. Like this.
패지디 아다 메다 동에 동남미 시우디 패지 척이었으리 디시 메다 레동에 동에레네 담에송 챤네다 구림도 센로데도 가다다 토마 지금 메다고스럽도 전에 맞다 가소래 레 다보부서리 이네지 셰트야르지 에는 그 기지 유르하다 드즈제디 코 뭐 지구로 때문에 정주지 매대버지 곧 규도계 몽골로 때문에 연구하지 매다 아니 다디 지당 아주도 시행되잖아요 가다 기지 직주야 되디 매다고 정신 아니 다디 알아서 다대지 루심그 나당들이 시행되잖아요 동해 정신 메다 동해 다 디버 정신 야고 자요나 아니 동보다 디도 롱초보부 아니 다 동보다 대니 녀를 렘베 류디디에 아니 그게 동보지기 가다 가사가 담에다 취지 담에 고미야디 패지
So in the case of, the fourth Satipatthana, the fourth one, which is the meditation on mind object, in my personal understanding is that what is crucial is really contemplation on the four attributes of suffering, truth of suffering, impermanence, nature of suffering, dukkha, and empty, and then no self. So, and those four are actually, there's a kind of a progression from one to another. So the first one is impermanence. And impermanence is something, even though the subtle level of impermanence is difficult to, experience, but at least on the grosser level, impermanence is something that we can easily point to and easily, relate to, because we know things in our life, things around us, they break, they come into being, they're dependent on other factors, they come and go. And then by reflecting upon impermanence, one thing that will become clear as you deepen your contemplation is that impermanence indicates there is no autonomy, because impermanence means something is dependent upon causes and conditions. And anything that is dependent upon causes and conditions cannot have ultimate autonomy or independence. And once you recognize that, this can open up to, especially in relation to our own existence, understanding of the suffering. And then once you deepen our understanding of suffering, nature of suffering, which is actually having no control over our own fate because of karma and afflictions, then, we will recognize that in this kind of reality, there is no place for a real owner, a real agent, a real self. And if there is no real self, then how can there be possessions belonging to that real self? And in this way, ultimately from the Indo-Tibetan tradition point of view, it is pointing towards the teaching of shunyata, emptiness of all phenomena. So in my understanding, the fourth, Satipatthana practice, the fourth mindfulness practice really seems to be pointing towards the fundamental truths of our existence and reality.
This also significant in the something gore. Kibu sami chumai meme lungwe nangabe. Namshi me guimen ka. Ka. Kare. Umar Kibu sami chumai meme lungwe nangabe. Namshi me guimen teleshana kibu kongs. Dati domde kyönde kibu komjun debeje yanda mai chidawa tishin kamne jere yan dushin yanda nitu means. Wadadi Nyer samtang gore. Che dus pa samtang yundu, ene si ngai lu, ngai sem, ngai ngas shani, tanya du ko, ta kanta di dambare, yore di ine, ngai lu da ngai sem, ngai ngas ngaki, dagu jangaki ngati samtang yundu, ene kyoni niya medebe chigi. Ta di, ene, samsambada dendregi ta umo rongjibe soro senshi yigi namshi sene be yilu dingne kansagi chi buge dakshiru senshiru dusin suyung yare ta tenjuwe lugi di mingyang dayo zang mado o buge yuyi ngone zhuboshi tenemeba ado umo jugbe tsikdi shira yagurisha Kaidarangi tsanyi tenjun tada kuwe ngobu jigbishir. Tungyi ngobu jigbishir tenyi zingbe tishingayami. Kanshir ngobu jida namchana tenyi dagshin ngoyle tsurudu nanyi mayi tishin jigdengi tanya dala nabar chamesha. Tenyi kaso rikbo kanshi ka dada shali gyawa ringmeba. Rikza tanya ringmeba tuyi gyawa hanga iman yorsa. Da diyi di shivu chigi. Nga nindari samtang korda di shivu ji kaishimbo risha.
So in my own meditation practice on a daily basis, I chant this, certain stanzas from Nagarjuna's precious garland, Ratnavali, where he says that the person is neither the earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, and so on. So he goes through the 6 elements that make up the our existence and says none of these are the person. But if none of these are the person, where is the person? The person isn't independent of them either. And then he goes on to say that the person is, the concept of person arises only in dependence upon the combination of these elements. And these 2 stanzas are really powerful because it points out very powerfully the sort of the assumptions that we normally make is unfounded. When we talk about my body, my feeling, my speech, we assume there is an owner that is me who actually, owns these, to whom speech, mind, and body belongs to. But when you examine using this kind of analysis that Nagarjuna presents us, we don't really find, who these things belong to. There is no person. But having said that, on the conventional level, on the basis of everyday experience and day-to-day popular convention, it is true. There is me and there is you. A person has feelings, a person has speech, and so on. But then the question arises, what exactly is that person? When we say I, what is the term referring to? What is the thought I am referring to? So on this question of what exactly is the person, there's a lot of discussion in Buddhist tradition. For example, Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and other traditions, accept that the person is a construct, but what the concept of person is referring to is the continuity of the consciousness. But Madhyamaka Prasangika basically reject all of this, attempt to find something objectively real as the true referent of the term person or the thought I am, and basically says that the existence of person can only be understood at the level of nominal reality as part of our conventions, part of the constructions that we, as part of our everyday experience, construct as for our convenient use for our everyday experiences. But there is nothing beyond this level of conventional reality which is objectively real. That is the reference of the person. So and here Chandrakirti has powerful arguments particularly in entering the middle way. There's a key section where he presents 3 important consequences for those who believe there is something that is objectively real out there. And Chandrakirti presents these contradictions to any notion of believing in something independent and intrinsic reality that is out there, that has an objective basis. So those teachings are really powerful, and in my own personal practice, I contemplate them deeply on a daily basis. So thinking of this, what we find in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, there are 2 stanzas which is really provides a grand summary of the teaching on Shunyata, where he says that, that whatever is dependent originated, that we call and declare to be empty. And what is empty is dependently designated, and this is the middle way. And then, therefore, and there is nothing that is there is nothing that is dependently originated. There is nothing that is not dependently originated, and there is nothing that is not empty. Because yeah, there is nothing that is empty. So those 2, stanzas really provide a very grand summary of the importance of the teaching on emptiness.
패지다 나무 고물 주슈베 그돌이야 나디 최슈도 와실 맨로 삼시 챙겨도.
So when I mention names like Nagarjuna and Chantakrithi, particularly two of them, I feel very close to them. There's a sort of a deep emotional connection. And I feel almost as if, especially in relation to Nagarjuna, when Nagarjuna was alive and active in the 2nd century, I may have been one among those who are in the far corners in his congregation, sitting somewhere.
투시체. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. We have come to an end of our Day 2 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful 2-day teaching program listening to His Holiness, the encouraging and inspiring Dharma talk given at the right time and be able to associate with the great masters. Just like what His Holiness has said, we are followers of the Buddhas, but over years, due to differences in respective cultures and lack of communication, interaction, and dialogue among Buddhist traditions, particularly in between Pali tradition and Sanskrit traditions, we are as if separated, with no communication at all, and sometimes misunderstanding occur. However, we are very blessed living in this modern technological era. It seems there is a revival in our interaction again, having opportunity to learn from each other and get to know each other. All this interaction helps to promote for a long-lasting benefits and happiness of the Buddha sasanas. Though we are coming from different traditions, the teaching of the foundation of mindfulness is there. The practice and the path is there. One practice, there is only one taste experience. That is a taste of liberation. That is a cessation of suffering. That is Nibbana. Therefore, the path is one. Pardon me if I'm wrong. There is no Mahayana, no Theravada, no Vajrayana. There is only the teaching of suffering and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So before we end for this wonderful and a very fruitful 2-day teaching program, we would like to invite the most venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nagatero, Secretary General, Asgiriya Chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka, to give a closing remarks. Please unmute your mic, please.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Semata Thiruvan Saranai. Atipujya Dalai Lama ඇතුළු ගරුතර මහා සංඝයා වහන්සේ සදහැවතුනි අපි ඊයේත් අදත් මේ දින තුලම අතිපූජ්‍ය දලයි ලාමා විසින් දේශනා කළ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍ර දේශනාවට එම ඉගැන්වීමට අපි බොහොම උනන්දුවෙන් ඇහුම්කන් දුන්නා. මේ පිළිබඳ උනන්දුවක් දක්වන ලෝකයේ බොහෝ කෙනෙකුට උන්වහන්සේගේ මේ දේශනාව තුළින් හොඳ අවබෝධයක් වැටහීමක් ලබා ගන්නට අවස්ථාව සැලසුණා. මේ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍රය ඉගැන්වෙන ඒ උතුම් ධර්ම කරුණු අපි එක් දිනකට පමණක් නෙමෙයි අපේ ජීවිතේ හැමදාම ප්‍රගුණ කළ යුතු බව අපි ඒ තුලින් හොඳට වටහා ගත්තා. තථාගත ලෝතුරා බුදුරජාණන් වහන්සේ වසර 2600කට පමණ පෙර දේශනා කළ මේ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍ර දේශනාව එහි අන්තර්ගතය මම හිතනවා නිතර පුහුණු කිරීම ලෝකයේ අපි බෞද්ධයන් හැටියට හැමෝටම ඉතාම වැදගත් දෙයක් හැටියට. ඒ වගේම මෙම ඉගැන්වීම උදෙක් අපිට ප්‍රායෝගික වශයෙන් භාවිතා කළ යුතු ඉගැන්වීමක්. භාවී තබ්බං වශයෙන් දක්වන ආකාරයට නිතර භාවිතා කළ යුතු ප්‍රගුණ කළ යුතු පුහුණු කළ යුතු ඉගැන්වීමක්. ඒ නිසා මෙවන් වසංගත තත්ත්වයක් ලෝකේ පවතින වෙලාවක දලයිලා අතිපූජ්‍ය දලයිලාමා විසින් මේ කළ දේශනාව මම හිතනවා අපි හැමෝටම ඉතාම වැදගත් වගේම මේ භාවනාව පිළිබඳ උනන්දුවක් ඇති අයට ඒ පිළිබඳ යොමු වීමෙන් නිතර නිතර ප්‍රායෝගිකව පුහුණු කිරීමෙන් අපි හැමෝටම මානසික තෘප්තියක් සතුටක් ඇති කරගන්න ඒ අවස්ථාවක් හැටියට අපි සැලකනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ උතුම් කාර්යය සිදු කළ උන්වහන්සේට අපි බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ ශ්‍රවණය කළ බොහෝ දිනාට මේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් හැමත සිතක් සාන්තියක් වේවායි අපි සිතින් ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරමු. ඒ නිසා මෙම මහත් කාර්ය ලෝකුරා ප්‍රේක්ෂකයින්ට සදහැවතුන්ට ශ්‍රවණය කිරීමට අවස්ථාව සලසා දුන් උන්වහන්සේගේ කාර්යාලයේ සියලු කාර්ය මණ්ඩලයට ඒ වගේම සියලු සංවිධායකින්ට අග්නිගාසියාවේ සම්බන්ධීකරණ කාර්යාලයට සහ තාක්ෂණික කණ්ඩායම් වලට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම දානමාන පිරිනැමු සියලු සදහැවතුන්ටත් අපි ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලාංකික භික්ෂුන් වහන්සේලා හැටියට අති පූජනීය දලයි ලාමා තුමාට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වැඩ සිටින අති උතුම් දලදා හඳුරන්ගේ ආශිර්වාද විශේෂයෙන් අද උඳුවපුර 15ක් පොහොව දවස ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේ ලංකාවට වැඩම කළ දිනේ ඒ උතුම් ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේගේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් රත්නත්‍රයේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් උන්වහන්සේට නිදුක් නිරෝගී සම්පන්නිය චිරජීවනයේ ලැබේවායි අපි ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා. සුඛී දීර්ඝායුකෝ භව.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
පාලිගේ චුජුදා 되게 렉샤게 추주 사몰로 간다 따가다게 차게 시셔야 돼. 매다 동에 동담에 시셔야 돼. 따가다게 차게 시 내가도 사몰로 투문부터네. 다 그게 캐야 다 이시셔 차대요. 매다 동에 동담에 시
all the followers of the Buddha, when it comes to the understanding the nature of reality, we share our adherence to embracing what can be referred to as the 4 axioms or 3 axioms of Buddhism. These are impermanence, that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are the nature of suffering, and all phenomena are empty and are devoid of self. So these, acceptance of these, 3 or 4 axioms is fundamental to all the Buddhist traditions, whether it is Pali tradition or a Sanskrit tradition.
So once again,
thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. Once again, we are very grateful for His Holiness for teaching us the important teachings on Maha Satipatthana Sutta. And also we thanks to our professional technical teams and many volunteers involved from various parties, from various countries behind a scene to make this teaching program a very great success. His Holiness, we are looking forward to another teaching program by His Holiness. Let us join palm together to express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness and all of you online, and rejoice by saying 3 times in the Buddha's own word, Sadhu, Sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
투지체 잠배벌 지도 좀 못도 군도상 못해 안 되신데 대다 꾸지셔서 따로 개원되다